Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Aram Arslanian. He's a coach, facilitator, and therapist with over 20 years of experience supporting individuals and groups in their development. He's also the host of the One Step Beyond podcast, was a guitarist in Betrayed, and currently fronts the band Change. Not only do we talk about parenting and sobriety, but we also discuss why punks make good business people, skateboarding, and the challenges of caring for aging parents. All right, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thank you.
You're a fellow podcaster, and I love the way on your show you kind of have a standard kickoff question, and as do I, so we're going to start with mine. And that's, how many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids, 2 that came with my wife into the marriage, and then 1 that I brought into the marriage. So, but I consider them all my kids.
Yeah. And what are the ages?
28, 20, and 6 years old.
I have that age bracket kind of spread too, which is interesting. The younger 2 came in with my wife. So yeah, it's interesting to have a 21-year-old now and an 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have 12 and 17. So it's these interesting, they're almost these 4-year spreads. So it's pretty interesting developmentally to be like surfing that parenting wave all at once. Because as you know, the older ones, pretty independent, but there's still like some interesting parenting that comes into that. Sometimes motivational. Sometimes for me, the hard part is like stepping away and being like, no, actually, that adult individual kind of has to solve and navigate their thing.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, we have one of our daughters is like with the person that we know she's going to be with, that she's going to marry and go on to build a life with. And then our youngest has just decided that her boyfriend is like a character from like a Disney TV show and keeps talking about it. So it's like we're on like totally different ends of it, but it's all cool. It's great. I mean, I just turned 50 like about a week ago. When I was 40, I had no kids. I didn't have my first kid till I was 44. So I went from being 40 and having no kids and kind of being like, I don't know if that kind of passed me by because I was so focused on other things, to being 50 and having like 3 kids and 2 of them being adults. But it's the coolest. Our oldest daughter works for the company that I own, and it's great. It's just been totally cool.
Yeah, and you know, even though you were later into the game, did you always want to be a dad? Did you generally think that was like in your trajectory?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I grew up in a pretty like chaotic household, and not because anyone was a bad, like both my parents are lovely people. It's just the circumstances. There was some mental health concerns in the family that were like pretty serious in terms of like what it did to the family dynamic. And it was kind of like having 4 individuals because it's my parents, myself, and a sibling. It was kind of like having 4 individuals just living in a house together rather than being a close family. And I always really craved having like a family unit, like a sense of just kind of like, these are my people. This is my tribe, so to say. And yeah, I always wanted to be married and have a family, and that kind of almost traditional idea of that like nuclear family. But life just took me a different way for a long time because I'm, super ambitious. I love doing stuff. I'm super focused on whatever I do. And I got really focused on school. I got really focused on my career. I got really focused on music, and it just took me down a different road. And that's why I was so fortunate, and I'm so appreciative that I got a chance to do all this as I'm a little bit older.
Yeah, I think there's a certain perspective. I mean, I wasn't, I'm 53 and my oldest is 21. So I wasn't, a kid, when he was born, and I had been a foster parent with their mom before that, that's a whole conversation unto itself and that system. But was it a hard adjustment for you? Like, after I divorced my first wife, I had my kids. We did a couple different systems. One was every other week, and then we did every 2 weeks. So, I had a lot of time that was sort of my time.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting remarried and having younger kids again, I'm like, oh, right. My time is really not often my time. And it did take me a little while kind of to adjust back into that. Was that a thing for you?
Um, yes and no. So, like I mentioned before, like I'm like hyper focused on whatever I do, and I think that didn't make me a great partner when I was younger. Like I would say that in previous relationships, it was like whatever I was doing, whether it's my career or if it was music or whatever, that was always the first thing, and then my relationship was like secondary or like maybe even tertiary. And um, as I got older, you just go through like difficulties in life. My wife now, who we just got married in March, but we've been together for like 4 years. We took it real slow with each other because we both had kids. What's been cool is she's been in my daughter Leora's life ever since Leora was 2, so she's known her the whole time. Um, Being in that relationship has been like a real good recentering for me. And the first thing I learned was how to be like an attentive and really good partner. And like the most important relationship I have is my relationship with myself, like just keeping myself in check, like being honest with myself, being good to myself, like tending to my needs when they're proper needs, and then also like
Yeah.
totally denying my needs when they're childish, like crazy needs. But the second most important relationship is with my wife. Like I have to have a good relationship with my wife. And then the next one is with my kids. And that might sound weird, but it's the idea of like starting inwards and going out, keeping everything in check. And that was once I got good at that, everything fell into line. Like my time management, my focus, my priorities, everything. It's just so crazy because I spent so much of my life focusing on like all of these relationships and all of this stuff around me, and totally ignoring like myself, like my relationship with myself, and then my relationship with my partner. So like once I kind of had that attitude adjustment and I was with the right person, and I was kind of into the right headspace to kind of like focus on like being the best version of me I could be, everything fell into space. So now scheduling stuff is like whatever. I have no problem with it. I'm just always totally focused on being with my wife, being with my kids, and then work just is the thing that comes after that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. And also just, having done both parenting, with a partner and without a partner, and that is to say, like, shout out to the older two's mom. We've had a great co-parenting relationship. That's been really valuable. And like, I always said, we're like, oh, we were better co-parents than we were like married people. So like, all right, we figured that out, but that's good. And most kids don't want their parents to get divorced. So, trying to make the best of that. And our motto is kids first every time. Like every decision was filtered through like what's best for the kids in this. It's like, got to put my anger aside, got to put my hurts aside. I got to deal with those on my own. And like I did through therapy. But when it comes to the kids, what is in the best interest of the kids?
Yeah, that's tough, man. Good on you for doing that, and good on you for having that kind of relationship with your ex. It's like, I mean, I remember when I was going through a divorce with our youngest's mom, and like lawyers and all that kind of stuff are involved, and everyone's like, oh, it's in the best interest of the child to have a good relationship. It's like, yeah, like I know
I
I'm an
heard.
adult, like 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 I am the parent of this person, but like but there's a reason why people remind you of that, because like although we all know that, it's so freaking hard to put aside that anger and that hurt, and to be in that space and not be petty or whatever. It's like really tough. So good on you for being able to be in that space.
Yeah, like they were at our wedding, which
Whoa,
was,
whoa,
yeah, right.
wow.
Like, yeah, they were there. And, the 21-year-old is also, he's like, in a way, the family glue.
Mm,
Like, he's the guy that just always wants to pull everyone together.
Hell yeah.
which is cool. And it was, it was important, I think, to the older two, and they have a much younger sister, for their mom and her partner. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was like not weird at all, and like, felt really natural, and kind of like we always did Christmas together, we did birthdays, we did all those things.
Wow.
And so it was like sort of like the big extension. I know some people think it's just bananas, but
I don't think it's bananas. I think it's admirable. I'm like, you know, I'm just not there. Like, and not only am I not there, it's like in a lot of ways I don't want to be there. And what I mean by that is like it's awesome. It's awesome if you can do that. Like hugely admirable, totally cool. But also, it's like I'm trying to keep my life as simple as I can keep it, man. And that adds a layer of complexity I'm not looking for.
right. And not to dig in, but it also takes two people with a willingness.
Totally. I mean, like I'm not like talking around something, but I can. There's like an undercurrent of implication there that it's like, yeah, like, I mean, I would sure like to be in kind of a warmer space, but you got to have someone who's going to do the dance with you, and that's not always the case.
Yeah, 100%. Let's pivot just a little bit, and
Hmm.
I want to sort of talk about your relationship with alcohol, and
Hmm.
your journey to sobriety, in
Hmm.
whatever way feels right and genuine to you.
Yeah. So I've been, I identify as an alcoholic. I've been sober for about 27 ish years, and like stayed like dead sober the whole time. Had no relapses or anything. Um, so I got sober ish, I guess, around like 22 ish in that time frame. So I guess maybe 20. I guess it would be 28 years this fall, which is weird, totally crazy to think about. Um, I mean, I had the standard thing you have, I was just like the messy friend that like drank too much. Like all my friends could like we all like were hard drinker kids in Calgary. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta. Started drinking in junior high, got in further into it in high school, post high school into university. Or college. I was just a wreck. And my friends were always like, you do the things, you get drunk, you act stupid, whatever the thing is. But mine was always the worst. I was always the friend that had to be managed. I was always the friend that had some crazy thing happen. I was always the friend who didn't know when to stop. And when I really started realizing I had a problem was not just when I was like, I would drink alone and stuff like that. But when I started having a problem, knowing I had a real problem, was when I'd get this, like, I can't even describe it. It's like this internal itchiness. Like I'd sit down and I would calculate how much money I had to get drunk. And if I didn't have enough money, I would calculate, like, I'd get like a little anxious about my alcohol consumption, and I'd want to drink faster and go there with an emptier stomach so I could hit harder. And I'd have this like weird like itchiness about like trying to make sure that I got drunk enough to get the effect that I wanted. So at that time, I was like, I don't know, like 20 or something. And I just the next 2 years were a total blur, totally spun out of control, went crazy. And there's a whole bunch of stories I could tell. Um, but there was a couple of events that were really, I guess, sobering. Like they were like crazy, totally crazy events. And like I'm sure people have way much crazier events. They were crazy for me. And at one point, I was like, this is no good. I know, not at one point. I said, this is no good for a lot of times. And I tried to quit and do this and that, and all the negotiations you'd have with yourself. But at one point, there's this kind of this line that was drawn, and I stopped. Um, and I never drank again, but I also didn't go and deal with the stuff that caused me to have problems with alcohol in the first place. And that's like a whole other chapter of the story of like dealing with the things that made me have a problem with alcohol.
Yeah, because then you just transfer that, right? That's like the whole thing. People do it in a lot of ways: sex, whatever, gambling, exercise. Like I got to be a crazy exercise person for a while, and had to like till like my knees were wearing out from running. I was like, okay, I got to find some balance here. And I didn't do 12 step, and I know a lot of people who have, and that's valuable to them. I really dug in with a therapist, this older female therapist who'd call me on my shit, which is what I
Mm.
needed. And I'd go in, and you've probably seen this because you're a therapist. I'd go in, I'd try and joke around, and she'd be like, no. We're not like, that's your thing. That's the thing you do to avoid the things you don't want to talk about. And she would just call me on that, and there's a number of years of like every week going in and just, digging into, things from childhood or, things in life. I've always felt this sort of quest for authenticity,
Mhm.
like to be pure to who I think I am, and hard on myself if I missed that, or pissed at work if I didn't feel work respected that. I had to deal with kind of all that stuff to come out and not only be someone who didn't drink, but someone who, could be a good partner or a better parent or all those things. What was your kind of recovery process?
Great question. So I got like sober and I decided I was going to be straight edge because I grew up in like punk and hardcore. And that just seemed like the logical thing. And I also was like too um, arrogant, I guess, to call myself an alcoholic. Like I didn't want that label. Like I was like, I don't know. I didn't feel comfortable with it. So it's like, oh, I'm straight edge. And like I knew I had a problem with drinking and I would say that to people, but I would never call myself an alcoholic. But the way that I switched my behavior, I quit drinking. I didn't deal with any of my stuff. And I just became like a total hyper focused person and hyper focused on whatever I was doing at the time, as I said earlier. And that's been a huge benefit to me, but at the sacrifice of, relationships, friendships, personal health. If I was going to do something, come hell or high water, I was going to do it no matter what. And that sounds like an admirable quality, but there's like and it has, like I said earlier, there's been like really good sides of it, but there's dark sides of it. And also the biggest piece was I didn't enjoy anything, right? Like, you do these things, you achieve these things that if you were to say to someone else, wow, but also like being like totally just like a big hole inside me that's just like you can't fill up at all time. And I just remember doing like, playing in front of a few thousand people in Europe or being on tour in Australia, like, like being going to South Korea on tour, like doing this stuff. And I am a terrible musician. I just want to put that out there. Like I was punching above my weight, like being like doing all this stuff for many, many years. I'm extremely lucky, but just this like hollow experience where I feel like, I'm watching a movie of someone else's life and not living it myself. And so it was a lot of that kind of stuff where it's like you're doing it, but you're not like emotionally attached to it. And you're also like 5 weeks or 5 months down the line thinking about what's next, what's next, what's next. So it's just never enough. So there was that. And it helped me a lot in a lot of ways, but it also like, cause I got to achieve a lot of stuff and it helped me build some really good habits around focus, getting things done, understanding how to structure things that make it work. But it also caused me to make a lot of bad decisions, like bad decisions with like friendships, relationships, doing things to kind of soothe my depression or my anxiety, choosing something to kind of keep the train going. Like, hey, I'm like, I haven't connected with my friends because I've been away on tour for like 6 months. And you know what? I should probably spend some time with my friends. And I actually shouldn't be around these guys in the band. I kind of like don't like them right now. Oh, there's another tour. Yeah, let's go do that. Like making choices like that just like keep avoiding life. Anyways, I got married. I just made a bunch of bad like relationship choices, all the stuff that people do. I found myself after I was a therapist working in this job outside of being a therapist. It was a consulting firm, and I was making the most money I'd ever had. I was doing great at the job, and I was the most miserable I'd ever been. And I was like, why am I so unhappy? I've had this crazy adventure of a life. Like I've done stuff that I would never have dreamt that I would have been able to do this stuff. And I look at myself in the mirror and I hate who I see. I don't feel like I have any real friends. I don't feel I'm in a good relationship. I don't feel I'm a good partner. I don't feel like I've got anything to offer anyone. I feel like a fraud. And it's kind of at this point where I built my life up on this like kind of house of cards, and it all just collapsed. And I had these span of years that were just absolute hell, like absolute living hell. And it was good in the sense that it really forced me to stop running away. Like I didn't have anywhere to run away to. I didn't have some great adventure I could embark on. I had to focus. I had to build my own company. I had to like really do like I had to kind of like focus on real life. And there was a real chance that if I didn't focus and do it well, I was going to fail. And what that required was that I go to a therapist. And I did try 12-step stuff previously. 12-step stuff was cool. Like there's nothing wrong with it. But because I'd been a therapist for so long, so I'd been an addiction and mental health therapist for so long, some of my former clients would be at the meetings. And it was a super awkward dynamic because I didn't feel I could be totally honest in front of them, which of course I could have been, or I could have just gone to a different meeting. But like I had this whole this whole thing going on in my head about it. And also it's like I had like a romantic relationship in the program, and like it just didn't like I couldn't be totally honest in that setting. And it was just and none of the people that I'm mentioning, it's none of their fault. It was just my fault that I had structured this thing to not work for myself because I just wasn't like real serious about changing. I didn't know I wasn't serious about changing at the time. But anyways, I when I went through this like period of just this hellish situation in my life, going to a therapist, doing the one-on-one work, and having really nowhere to hide, kind of like what you were saying with your therapist. Like my therapist was like, "Hey, buddy, I'm on the clock. Like, you want to come here and like bullshit me? That's your problem, you know." Like, but like you're paying to do that. And I did therapy for 2 years, once a week for 2 years straight, and it changed my life for sure. And that's really how I got like what I'd say is like actual sober.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and really resonates with me. Animal rights are important to you. Is there an
Mhm.
intersect there for you between sort of sobriety and animal rights? Certainly, in a lot of the straight edge world, there
Mhm.
is. There's
Mhm.
the whole vegan straight edge thing, and lots of bands like Earth Crisis and all that. But is there an
Mhm.
intersect there for you?
Yeah, I'm going to tell it in a weird roundabout way, if you don't mind, though.
No, all good.
So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, and both my parents are immigrants. I have an exotic name. My sister has an exotic name. Like growing up in Calgary, it was just kind of like you just paint a target on us, right? Like, like, and so we got messed with a lot by other kids, like right off the hop. Like when we moved into the neighborhood, because I wasn't born there, we moved there from Montreal. We had no extended family around us, and we just didn't have a people there. And so I grew up like getting into fist fights constantly. Like I was always getting messed with, and I was like a pretty spunky kid, so I'd fight. Like, and again, in a way, it kind of served me to in as an adult to have this stuff. But the idea of safety and being safe has kind of been a through line. Like probably my biggest problem is feeling safe and feeling like the relationships I have are real and those people are going to be there and all of that. And there's like some deep psychology involved in that. Um, in life, the thing that I've really come to value is when people can be merciful to other people. When someone can clearly not be something's going on for them. Maybe they're super insecure. Maybe they don't know how to hang out. Maybe they have some cognitive differences. Maybe they're all of the whole spectrum of things we can talk about here. And I haven't always been good at being merciful, and I don't know, like it's like an ongoing project, but merciful and compassionate. When I say compassionate, I don't mean those like corny like "be kind" T-shirts. Like that's not like that's what I'm talking about. Like I'm talking about being looking at someone and knowing something something about their life is bringing this thing up for them, and or put them in this situation, and I can just give them a little bit of mercy here. And that's not to say that you want to have someone in your life be like a total shithead to you and you're going to be like, I can be merciful, but just how we deal with people. All that to be said is when I went through this like really crazy period of my life, I found myself having to suddenly make a company, and I'd never built like a real deal company before. I called three people that I'd done work with before. So this is when I was a consultant. I called them up and just said, "Hey, I'm starting a new company." And they're like, "What? What happened to your other job?" I'm like, "I'm starting my own company." And they're like, "What's it called?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't have a name." And they're like, "Okay, well, what do you do?" I'm like, a better version of what I did in my old company. Like I do something different and I'm going to do that even better in my new company. They're like, okay, how much you charge? I'm like, less than I used to. And these three people, all three of these people said, okay. And these are people who run like $1 billion businesses. Like they're huge, like they're very serious business people who took this cryptic email from me from my Gmail, and then B, had a phone call with me where I just kind of like, I was like, I started my own business. I don't know what it's called. I don't quite know what I do. I don't know how much I charge. And then C, I said, okay, yeah, we'll do it. And all three of those people I sent invoices off to immediately. And I basically started my company with three people who had no reason, no reason, no reason to do that. And they set me up to do my company and like to basically rebuild my life. So like my darkest hour that I'd ever been in, like literally darkest hour, three people who I kind of know totally helped me out. And again, this big roundabout way thing of going like, people have immense power on this planet, huge power. Those three people could have just said, nah, sorry, man. Like that sounds crazy,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck to you. Like hit me up in like a year or two. Human beings have immense power. We can be mean to people. We can be kind to people. We can make someone feel like an outsider. We can be neutral to them. We can be welcoming to them. Human beings can increase suffering or decrease suffering. The story I just told you are three people who are like, this guy's going through something. I'm going to bet on him. They decrease suffering. This world that we live in is crazy. It has such a high level of suffering. And right now it feels like the suffering is like exponentially growing. And there is no other animal on the planet like human beings who have the ability to make choices that can increase or decrease that. Every single day, we all have that ability. And I'm not going to tell anyone like, people need to make their own choices about things. Like, I don't want to waggle my finger at people, but if we all could agree that decreasing suffering is a good thing, one of the simplest, easiest things we can do is decrease animal suffering. And you just do it meal by meal by meal. I'm super serious about veganism. I've been doing it for a long time. And when I was younger, like in the early 90s, I was vegan, but like for like a year, and donuts took me out because I was like young and there was no good alternatives. But I've been vegan now for like a long time, like 15, 16 years. And I just really believe it's such a merciful, it's a good way to demonstrate mercy and reduce suffering. So I'm super serious about it. And it's totally connected to, I got to be merciful to myself. I got to be merciful to others. Sorry, I know that was a long way around it, but yeah, the crossroads, the two are connected 100%.
No, we like the long way around on this podcast. I mean, I think that's some of like the secret sauce is just people telling their stories sort of the way they tell it. And a lot of that, resonated with me, especially, that dealing with people thing and, sort of accepting. And I remember saying to someone at work at one point, like, I know like that person can be hard to work with. Like I get it because I'm working with them too.
Mm-hmm.
But step back and look at sort of the things that make them hard to work with, and you realize, oh, it's actually got to be really hard to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a long time to like get there on a lot of levels. One was just like being confident at work and feeling like, no, you're not, I'm not going to get fired for like saying my opinion, and learning to say no has been huge for me. Still working on that a little bit. The craziness of this week at work indicates that, but like it's just those kind of skills and like leading with compassion, like in all like venues are just super important. Cause as you said, yeah, the suffering right now and as a parent trying to like explain it to your kids is kind of brutal. I don't often have answers. So right to your point, like what are the ways you can reduce suffering? Find those ways.
To me, it's all, so I have this kind of framework where I talk about, like I don't believe in perfection or extinction. around behaviors. Do you mind if I just dip into this for a
No,
second?
absolutely. Go for it.
Um, so like, let's say someone's like, I'm never going to be, I grew up playing in bands, as we kind of just touched on a little bit. And like being picked on in the van sucks. Like everyone in the van is like, you're the butt of everybody's joke. And you can kind of feel like when someone, it's like blood in the water when someone becomes that space. So everyone's like kind of trying not to become that person, you know? And someone almost, oh, not always, but very often kind of becomes that person. And it sucks. And sometimes people psychologically can just roll with it and they think it's funny. Like my buddy Mike, who we play in a band now, he's not like the butt of the joke, but he's the one that people kind of go after a little bit. But he's so good at like handling it and laughing along with it as like people kind of make fun of him that it makes us not make fun of him as much. It's this like weird counter move he has.
Yeah.
It's
It's like
really
reverse
funny.
psychology or something.
Totally. But so being in the van, it's like, and kind of like making fun of someone, it's like, that's like, it sucks to be that person. And you also know it's like, oh, this sucks. Like, I know we're all kind of picking on this person. This is totally suck. But there's this like group dynamic. It's hard to break out of. So the reason I bring that up is like the idea of being like nice or being a good person. It's like, yeah, well, sure. But if you're in a good company culture, it's a lot nicer. It's a lot easier to be nice to people and be well balanced and not be gossipy and not commiserate and not like pick on people. It's way easier. If we take you, that same person, and we put you in a really intense workplace where people like act super wild. And at first you're like, I'm never going to be like this. But over time, if you stay in there, you kind of get caught in those currents. The idea is like environment has so much to do with how people act. Like people who are in a tour van or kind of like being crappy to their friend probably wouldn't do that if they were all just like hanging out in the street and they had never been on a 6-week tour together. Environment has a lot to do with, and the culture within environment and the culture within that environment has a lot to do with how people act. So instead of saying like, I'll never be like that or I'll always be like that. So like perfection versus extinction of behaviors. I always just talk about having like aspirational behaviors. And what I mean by that is like anything I don't like about myself, I want to see a reduction in frequency, duration, and impact. It just means that I want to do it less often. When I do catch myself doing it, I want to catch it quicker and have it go down. And if I do it less often, and then when I do it, it's very short periods, it should have less than a negative impact on myself and others. The things that I aspire to be like more, like let's say be merciful or compassionate, I want to see an increase. And then when I'm doing it, I want to have the duration go up. And then I want that impact to be more. I encourage people to not look at life like, I got 100% or I got zero, like on these behaviors I don't like. Start with like 70%. I don't know, start with like a B and be like, I would like my aspirational behaviors to be start at 70%. B is a pretty good grade. And the better you get at things, you just go up. But you should never expect in life to be like, I'm going to be this like perfect, kind, like amazing person. Like it's very difficult to maintain that, especially if like you end up in a weird workplace or you go through a divorce or something happens in your family. It can bring out the worst in people. And as environments changes, behavior is going to change. Not for everyone, but what I say is like, I encourage people to have like an to aspire to be certain ways and to have like kind of a grounding number where you're like around 70% of the time, I want to know I can nail that. But the other 30% or 25% or 10% or whatever it is, when I'm off of those behaviors, I want to be able to recognize that, hold up a mirror, and as quickly as I can get back to the good stuff. I think it's a little bit of a more compassionate way of dealing with yourself. And I bring that philosophy into when I do coaching in companies, because, when companies talk about company culture, they talk about it as if it's a fact. Like, we are this. It's like, really? Like, what about that guy in the engineering department who just said like the meanest thing I've ever heard? Like, is that guy part of you? Like so I always talk about setting aspirations and scaling up from there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I remember as a parent, especially when I was single parenting, and I had this idea to be like the perfect parents or super dad or whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember listening to, and say what you will, about Brene Brown, but she put out this audiobook called The Gift of Imperfect Parenting.
Mm.
And it really helped me. I became a better parent by like forgiving myself for not being the perfect parent or trying or just doing my best. And that really makes sense what you were saying. But the company culture thing is also funny because I think company owners are like, this is what our culture is. And I'm like, no, it's really what everybody else says. And it's really not. Maybe I just stole that from one of your podcast episodes, but it's just a funny dynamic being on a managerial level in a company and hearing these conversations. And I work for a place that has really, like, it's pretty fabulous, company culture and, care about it. And I've said to the owners of the company, I'm like, I want the culture of the company I work in is at least, if not more important than the work I'm doing. Like, I'm there a lot of hours. I want to be with a group of people who, like, share a mission and, like, are willing to work hard and all those things, but are cool people to do with it with, and who care, like, I'm there a lot, and so I've been at places that it's not, I've been at places where they're individuals who just yell at people and they're never taken to task because they bring in a lot of money for the company. And, my punk rock side of me does that like puts my punk rock mohawk up or something. I can't abide that. I can't abide just treating people shitty just because you can.
Yeah. Well, so 100, like, I'm with you fully. One of the things that I encourage people to think about is, like, what are your, like, checks and balances with work? Like, what are you trying to achieve at work, right? Are you trying to, like, tuck in a job and, like, work in that job and have that be your job or your career for a long time? You're trying to achieve something. You're trying to start your own business. Because, like, company culture is such a dicey thing when people talk about it. I'll never forget, I was at this company offsite many, many years ago. And the CEO of a company was just, like, the nicest guy, wonderful, wonderful guy. People underneath him were, like, out of their minds. Like, it was like a really wild, wild situation. Wonderful guy, the CEO. And he gets up in front of everybody, and there's, like, about, like, 80 people in the room. They're all leaders of this company. And he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And everyone was like, oh wow. Like, oh. It's like ripple goes through the room. He's like, if we have a good culture, it's going to beat anything else in this company. Our business strategy, our, like, our process, everything. It's amazing. And I was like, what the hell is this guy talking about? This company right now has got a real problem, like a real deal problem with its leadership and its culture. And it was as if he said that, and it was like, and then, of course, everyone's saying that to each other afterwards at this thing. And it was the first time I'd ever really experienced, and I was quite young in my coaching career at this point, I'd ever really experienced kind of like the group think of culture of, like, if you just say a bunch of good sounding stuff, everyone's like, oh, we got a great company culture. But the pragmatics of it are like, no, like, that's not true at all. And company culture is a super wild thing that, like, every company is going to say, we've got a great culture, and here are, tent poles, or here are our pillars, or here's our foundation. And there's really no way of knowing as you get into that company whether it's true or not true. So you should know what your priorities are. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? And you should go into a company assuming at best their culture is normal, at best. And it's better to be pleasantly surprised by having a good culture or moderately disappointed. Because culture is like, when I think of company culture, very few companies do the right kind of work to ensure that it's actually the right way, because it's usually like a multi-year project. And when they get it there, it's like having a garden. You still need to tend to your garden. It's not like building something that's going to last ages. You have to always work on that culture, and that requires tons of investment, time, right, kind of leadership and all of that. So people should know their priorities, because if your priority is to just get some experience, and until you get to, like, a higher level, or till you can start your own company, or till you do this, till you do that, then a trade-off might be go work at a great firm that has, like, a great reputation and handle how crappy the culture is for a short period of time. Or if you want to tuck into a job and stay there, then you should be a stricter shopper about where you hire or where you work. You should do more research, spend more time, and be ready to leave right away if they don't have a good culture. Know your priorities, because the culture is not a promise anywhere.
Yeah, a couple things on that. Also, having worked at a shitty place makes you
Mm,
appreciate the good place. Like sometimes
100%.
younger staff members, I'm like, I get you're kind of like complaining and yeah, we're busy right now or whatever it is, but I'm like, you have not worked at a place that, your stomach hurts every morning before you go to work. Like,
Mm,
go do that and then come back here and you're probably going to think differently. But also, I think I've worked at places where I just did not fit.
hmm
A shareholder traded company doing military work
hmm
does not fit with me. And I took that job because I needed more money as a single parent.
hmm
So there's a reason to do it. But after a time, I was like, I can't do this. There's other people there who 100% do great in that company.
hmm
So, a big part of that was me, and which is okay. Like, not every place is a fit for every person.
Right. So there, trade off, right? You're like, hey, I don't agree with this, but I need the money because I'm a single parent. That's a trade off. But you're like, I know I can only do this for a short period of time. I think in North America, people have been sold this idea that you're supposed to have perfect everything, like perfect life, like everything's supposed to be perfect. And that's just not real. And if you think about like the quadrants of work, people think they're supposed to have a great boss. They're supposed to have a great team. They're supposed to love what they do. And they're supposed to get paid a fair wage with great benefits and good work-life balance. I can walk you from company to company and company to company. And if you have 3 of those boxes checked, you have a pretty phenomenal job. If you have 4 of those boxes checked, you have like a rare unicorn. So few people have all 4 of those things. And of those 4, you just got to decide what are the ones that'll make a break for me and then try and scale up over time. I mean, the goal should be you have all 4, but very rarely do people walk into a company and just get all 4 right off the hop. You might have an awesome boss and a great team. You might like what you do, but you get paid terribly. Your benefits are awful and work-life balance is terrible. Or you might be paid a ton of money and have great benefits. You might really like what you do, but your team sucks and your boss is an asshole. Like, which one of those is better? It depends who you are. It depends what you're trying to do. And this kind of like lack of nuanced conversation about culture and the kind of the trade-offs of like why work one place or another. It's like, if you don't dig into that, you're just going to find yourself like, first of all, you're not going to be strategic about how you build your career, but also it's like you're going to find yourself disappointed more often than not because there is rarely a perfect job. You got to really understand what your trade-offs are. What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump off a little there and keep talking about this. You put a picture up on LinkedIn, and it was you in a suit, and then
Mm-hmm.
you with all your tattoos, and it's sort of a little bit is like that conversation I had about my authentic self and all that. But I also think like in a lot of ways, punks are really good business people.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're scrappy. The DIY kind of ethic is real.
Mm-hmm.
I also think somebody in sobriety and recovery, and why I'm public about it at work, is also like I represent that you can like get through hard things and be
Mm-hmm.
successful.
Mm-hmm.
Like my firm has 3 offices in New York. I run the marketing and business development for all of them. We build hospitals. We built the fucking Dalai Lama's library,
Mm-hmm.
in North America. Like, what the hell? We build libraries. We build detox centers. Like, we do affordable housing. Like, we do good work. It is a big job.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, it hovers close to the 4 boxes too, which is pretty incredible. Um, and it's been built to sort of be that way. Is it
Mm-hmm.
perfect every day? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love to hear that it hovers close to those 4 boxes, and like, because we can go like deeper into the boxes and like how I define them and all that, but like that goal is that like sometimes you get into a job and like 3 of those boxes are checked, and that's an amazing job, and then eventually that 4th box gets checked, and maybe you change, maybe what you need out of a boss or what you need out of a team changes. It shouldn't always be that hunt for the perfect job. It should be, what are my trade-offs? What am I trying to achieve? And like, okay, I'm going to nest into this job for a while, see what happens, and go from there. Um, Around the like the punks are the best business people. Yeah, like I'll tell you, nobody can figure it out like a punk can. And I think that punks, there's two things. So I think there's some people through punk who got success too young. They were like part of a band that put out like a great record or a series of great records when they were like very young, and it distorted it distorted their expectations of life. And there's like a few people I got to think of, but there are other punks who are just like, literally, I could drop you into anywhere, into any situation, and you would figure this thing out. And it's the coolest thing about punks, because like we've all been kind of come up in this culture of figure it out and think big and just assume you can do it. Like just assume you can do it and then you'll figure it out. And that kind of thinking is phenomenal. Like the idea that you could literally not know how to play an instrument, but you know what? Hey, let's start a band. And not only let's start a band, let's play shows. And not only play shows, let's go to another city where we know we'll network with other people. And not only that, let's tour the country, and let's, with our terrible skills, like record a demo or a 7-inch and let's tour the world with our band when we still barely know how to play instruments. There's something about that is so it might sound reckless to other people. To me, it's just this like the absolute daring, the vision, the like idea how to like create like structure around you, make things work, build the right kind of communities. It's super awesome. So yeah, nobody figures it out the way punks figure it out. The other side is like people who survive things. It's like, and survive things and aren't like terribly bitter about it, who don't have a ton of resentment, but people who have gotten through something and then come out the other side with like resolve and grit, but also like gratitude. I think those people are some of the best business people I've ever met.
Yeah. You know, it's I have a tattoo that says greatly blessed, which I got because my grandmother always said that. And that's, you know, that's that like gratitude. That's to me staying away from the notion that the grass is always greener. That to me is, you know, compassion towards other people. Remember your blessings. So I think, but that's also, you know, it's come from thinking about her, but also coming through my own struggles, right? Like, and struggle is important. Like if kids don't struggle, they don't learn, you know, coping skills, survival skills, whatever it is. You know, obviously you want the struggles to be within sort of a reasonable level. You know, and as a parent, it was a learning curve for me to sort of let the kids struggle a bit, you know, like that it's actually okay.
Yeah, I mean, a certain amount of life struggle is certainly good, and other times it just feels like, oh my god, really, this this thing. I, you know, when I was a younger person, you know, like kind of like morose young man, I got a Morrissey tattoo. I got a Trouble Loves Me tattoo, and I kind of laugh at it now because it's like, no, trouble doesn't love me. I love trouble. Like that's really what it is. And the way I kind of think about it now is, you know, as I've gotten a bit older and really kind of landed in a good place in my life, I've really scaled back my relationships in business and in band stuff and skateboarding and everything. I just have this huge network of people. And it's tough managing that like amount of people and like managing relationships with that amount of people. And I would find myself like very insecure constantly about being liked and having friends and all this stuff. And I really just realized I was like, man, I gotta scale this way back. Like I'm way overdrawn. And I just brought it down to like a real core group of friends. And that's not saying anything negative about any people that I used to spend a ton of time with. Great. Like most of them, like very wonderful people. I just needed to like really focus on my nearest and dearest. And there's something that I've really come to understand about myself. When I'm feeling bad, like if I'm like depressed or anxious or whatever, or sorry, let me flip it. Sometimes I have this desire to reach out to people that I haven't spoken to in years. And whenever I've got that like itch to do it, I always think, how do I feel right now? Like what emotional state am I in? And there's some people I'm super happy and I just want to talk to them again. It's like, yeah, And those times I hit those people up. But if I'm getting this like desire to reach out to this person and it's like, oh, I'm really like depressed and anxious right now, really what that is me loving trouble. I'm trying to reach out to someone who I've had like not a great relationship with, or that something about our relationship always made me feel like bad about myself or whatever. And keeping my life much more simple, like really tight group of friends, really tight with my family. That's where I spend most of my time, and just managing that and then reaching out to people, either because I've got this desire to reach out to them, but I'm feeling like awesome when I'm thinking about it. Like maybe it's some great story or whatever. Great. But if I'm getting this urge and I want to do that, it's because like, oh man, I love trouble and I've loved trouble my whole life and I've had enough trouble in my life. So like there's something good about like being resilient and all that stuff, but there's also something good about knowing what's like, hey, I'm trying to create a bad situation for myself here. I have got to step out of it.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. And the other night, I think it was like 9 o'clock, and I said to my wife, like, I'm just gonna get into bed and read. Like, I'm so happy with the idea that I can just get into bed at 9 p.m. and read. That would be.
Yeah.
I don't need trouble. I don't need that. I try and get up at 6 a.m. a number of times a week, and I don't run anymore, but as a walker, and I live right near a lake, and get up and try and get 2 miles in before anyone else is awake to fit that in. But it's that simple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's just like enough complications in all of life without trying to invite more in.
Totally, man. And like people who are like difficult or whatever it is, like really like just people who are tough, people who require a lot of management. Nothing wrong with them. Fairly like good. Be who you are. But I just want my life to be simple. Have you ever watched that show, The Bear?
Yes, we're on season 3.
Okay, this is apropos for our conversation. Then my wife and I have decided we're not going to watch it anymore, because it's so anxiety inducing to watch season 3. And we just thought, we've done a lot of work to make our life like as anxiety free as we can be and to be like relaxed and happy. Why are we watching this show where people are going through these ultra intense levels of anxiety and trauma? Like, why are we watching this? Because we were watching it gasping for air, hoping the episode would end and nothing even more terrible would happen. So we stopped watching it.
Yeah, we it's funny because I think we're 3 or 4 episodes into season 3. So I lived in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I fucking adore that city. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the filming of Chicago, I think the music in this series is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Like I loved season 1.
Mm-hmm.
I thought season 2 was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And season 3 there's only one instance, because I felt like in all those other seasons, there are these moments where the heart pulled through, and I'm just not finding that now. So it's a couple of things. It's my theory that a lot of like TV shows and other things just keep going because they're successful. Like
Mm-hmm.
season 1 of The Bear was kind of perfect,
Mm.
and you should have just fucking stopped because it was kind of perfect.
I loved. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I love season 1. I'm right there with you. Perfect. Really like season 2, and like I love the cast is amazing. They're like incredible actors. There's like a Canadian dude in there, Maddie. Like, good for you, man. Like is it not a guy that I know, but just like he's like a known Canadian guy. I'm
Yeah.
Canadian, so I'm stoked for him. And I like everything about the show. It looks beautiful. I love the character arcs, but man, this is like, dude, I've had enough anxiety and
like
trauma in my own
when
life.
you're checking your pulse, trying to just eat your popcorn on the couch.
I don't want this.
And we have so little time to like consume media. I mean, it's sort of a joke. It like takes us like months to watch 8 episodes of something just because we're, my wife's a therapist with a private practice. She also is a college professor, 4 kids, like all the shit. We're busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we sit down, we also want it to just sort of be a gratifying experience and not one that like, oh, like, why are we doing this? Like, let's just do something else, like put on records or something that is soothing.
Totally. My wife afterwards was like, "We should watch Gladiator." I'm like, "Russell Crowe's Gladiator?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Huh?" Like, yeah, let's watch Gladiator. Like, just like let's do the exact opposite of this thing to kind of like clear our minds of it. But yeah, I still love The Bear. I'm just gonna like wait till it's done and then read what happened on Wikipedia and then wait for season 4 and hopefully it will be a little sunnier.
Or they'll just realize it's time to move on.
Yeah, maybe. I
Capitalism doesn't like that.
I love the cast. I think it's so great. But man, I just like, life's too short. I don't want any more anxiety that I have to deal with.
Yeah, and the filming is really interesting. It's all these really tight shots, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So one other thing we kind of have in common is, we have this aging parent thing going on. We both have a parent with dementia that are in, memory care kind of units. And, it's been about a month since my mom moved into one, which is, my wife and I went up and helped my dad do that, which is legit probably one of the hardest things, I've ever done. You just, my wife stayed with my mom and like we moved some furniture in on Saturday. We moved her clothes in on Sunday, and Monday morning we brought her, and my dad's telling her the whole time, and we sort of get there, and I think this is sort of how they do it, and they kind of swept her off into an activity and we just kind of walked out. I was like, fuck, that was really hard. And it's a lot of things. It's those moments you're grateful for your sobriety and your clarity of thought to like be there for my dad. Cause as hard as that was for me, they've been married since 1963, like that's like, I know, right? Like mind blowing.
Yeah.
And, every holiday they've spent together, all those things. And even though it was super hard for him to care for her before the move, and it was, getting not to be the safest, he was trying to bathe her and do all these things. And he's going to be 85 in October, right? Like he's, intellectually super sharp, but he's legit not a young dude anymore. I just love it if you could sort of talk a little more about, your experience with that and how it's going.
Yeah. So my dad lives with dementia and he's in a care home now. And it's what my mom and I commonly say. It's the best version of a bad situation. The care home that he's in, shout out to St. Jude's, is so wonderful. And it's relatively close to our house, about a 30-minute Uber drive from my mom. So she sees him 6 days a week. My daughter has got to like spend enough time with him that she has like some level of relationship with him. But it's brutal. It's fucking brutal. Like, I mean, both my uncle and my dad have dementia, so of course I got a lot of fear about what the future holds for me.
Yeah, I hear you.
But I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I could say here. I mean, my dad was a really like nice person who had a very difficult life and really like a lot of like tough stuff. He grew up in poverty in Syria, and his family couldn't afford to send him to school, so he just kind of like made his own way. He worked his way up and became a water engineer with like no engineering degree, and like traveled all over the world, like bringing water to different places. Like cool guy, charming guy, like, pretty stoic, but when he wanted to be, he could like be the most hilarious guy in the room. Real nice guy. And he didn't deserve what happened to him. He didn't deserve this. He's good man. All those things wouldn't hurt a fly. It really, again, kind of put me in this space. This concept that so I played in this band called The First Step, and the singer of The First Step, Steve, is a really close friend of mine. Both him and the guitar player Aaron and I are real close, and I love Greg and Fred, who are in the band as well. It's just like I'm still just really tight with those two dudes. And we talk a lot, like kind of philosophically about stuff when we write lyrics. And even though like I'm not really like an active musician, I write a lot of lyrics all the time. And kind of talking about this concept of death and how death is this kind of like far off thing you can't relate to. Like, it's coming. People who have died. You hear about people who die on TV, like, all the people that die on the planet. But the idea of you not existing anymore is like the most insane thought. Maybe not for you, but I'll say for me, it's just like wrapping your head around that. And then watching my father in this kind of like like sort of death thing has really like given me a lot of clarity. And the clarity is that like death is like the best friend of life. And that like life is so much richer when there's an end to it. And seeing this kind of like decline of my dad has really helped me appreciate my time with him a lot more, but I appreciate my time with my mom and this time that we have together, and our time with our daughter. It's been a great refocuser. And I'm not saying that I'm not like freaked out by the idea of death at all, but the idea that death is really the best antidote to not living a good life. Like if you're living a life that's like too focused on like whatever things we get focused on, money or prestige or whatever, like whatever things distract you from living a good life, the best antidote to that is death. And the idea that it's just like whatever you try to focus on achieving is total bullshit. It does not matter. Like really focus on enjoying life and being there and being present with your loved ones. And like my dad's it's like one of the, I guess, like, I don't know, not to be dramatic, it's kind of like the last thing he taught me as he's kind of drifted into this.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's a lot about like what, my wishes are as I get older, if it turns in that direction. And, my mom made her career in life working with kids, and, also is able to build a relationship with the younger two, which is really beautiful. She thinks the 8-year-old is a sort of a 2-year-old perennially, but it's beautiful. He'll play peekaboo with her, like it's really this sort of, this gift too, right? And then bringing, the kids to see her for the first time was like, it just was hard. It's just a fucking it's a terrible disease. And it's like this, death by 1,000 little like losses. And, I was talking to my dad last night, and he was like, you were the first one that noticed, like in 2010 on some vacation, we'd always go to Maine to see her. And you were like, is it just me, or is mom like asking the same things like over and over and over again? So you sort of trace it in reverse, and you can sort of find those first signs. But for a long time, it just sort of is what it is. And then it really accelerates, and it's really, it's accelerated a lot. And, and it's terrible, but you also think at a certain point, please, like, don't let this person just suffer, like,
yeah,
it's just fucking hard. Yeah.
And then you also have to do like wild stuff, like help your other parent make decisions that they don't want to make.
Yeah.
When my parents lived in Alberta, and my dad had been diagnosed at this point, and was quite ill. And so it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and they had home care. So my mom was in a scenario where she was trying and just like keep my dad at home for as long as possible. And they had a home care worker that would come in, and boom, the pandemic hits and home care is gone. There's no one coming into the home. And my parents' friends are all seniors. And so they can't go into the house and bring groceries because nobody wants to be around each other because of COVID. My mom can't walk to the grocery store because she lives in the middle of a community, and she can't leave my dad alone. And my mom's just freaked out. And I have to call my mom and be like, it's time. You're moving to Vancouver. And I flew to Vancouver the beginning of flew to Calgary at the beginning of the pandemic on this plane that like it was like it was before, at least in Canada, like everyone had to wear masks. So like there's this like COVID thing. The plane is sold out. I'm sitting in the middle seat. It was the only seat left. I'm stuck between these two guys.
You're
I'm
like,
thinking,
I'm
God,
going down.
am I like gonna catch some like disease and then bring it to my elderly parents? We're all gonna die. I don't have any choice. I get there. I rented a car. I loaded everything we could out of my parents' house into this SUV, and I drove my parents through a snowstorm across the Rocky Mountains back home, where I moved them into a 1-bedroom apartment with me because it was COVID and I couldn't get them anything. And we lived that way for almost 2 months. It was so freaking crazy, man. But my mom would have just stayed in that house, and I mean, they would have both died. It would have been the end of them. And after that, it was just about helping my mom make the decisions she didn't want to make. She wanted to keep him in the house for as long as possible, but like it was whale because he was sundowning. He was like trying to, my dad was trying to escape from the house. He's like a spry guy. So he was like, he could do it, you know? And like, we were very lucky that we were able to kind of contain that. But I'm also like trying to run my business, trying to be a dad. And I'm like running to my parents' apartment every few minutes, trying to like help out. And helping my mom make those tough decisions, and then sitting with her when she's having second guesses and doubting herself and being like, am I good? Have I been a good wife? Did I like abandon him by putting him in this place? Like it's just a brutal disease. It's a brutal situation. It's brutal what happens to the parents. And it also puts you in this like real, like you just have to help your parents make those decisions no matter what, and you got to have a complete resolve around it. And it's wild, man. It's a wild thing. And I hope to, by the grace of God go I really want to make, I hope for all of us that this disease is brought to an end, because it's terrible.
Yeah, let's talk about something more pleasant.
Please. I feel like we just did season 3 of The Bear.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and season 4 at the same time. So let's talk about your podcast a little bit, which really I like. It's called One Step Beyond. And I love, there's like a lot of merger of sort of business and culture that like really like vibes with me. Sort of what's the origin story on the podcast?
First, thank you very much, because it's something I bust my ass on. Initially, it was the type of business I have. I run a consulting company called Cadence Leadership and Communication, and we work with businesses globally on 3 things. One, we do individual and team coaching around like leadership, how to have a good dynamic, how to be a great leader. So we do things like 360 assessments, and there's a ton of psychology involved with that. The second thing we do is trainings, like how to write a good email, how to have a difficult conversation, how to give a great presentation, and like lots of stuff like that. And then the third thing we do is workplace mental health. It has been an awesome ride. I am super, super fortunate. I started it with just myself, a notebook, a cell phone, and like my parents' dire warnings, like do not start your own business, ringing in my ears. And now we're 8 years in. We work literally globally at the like now, and it's just been great. It's been one of the greatest privileges of my life to lead this company with wonderful people. So the podcast started as an outcrop from that. The idea being is that in my industry, you typically kind of have to have a book to have credibility. I don't have time to write a book, man. Like, get out of here. Like that's really hard. So we're like, we have to give people the sense of what it's like to work with us and what it's like to know us and the kinds of questions we have. And it has a lot to do with like the business of itself is kind of branded quite a bit off of my personality and just kind of how I like look at things. So we wanted to give potential clients, a chance to kind of like get to know me a little bit through this and like kind of see how I would like talk to people and how I'd break things down. That's where it started. And it was like, clunky and like weird because you're trying to figure out how do you do an interview? What am I trying to get out of it? And after a while, I got my rhythm about it. And it used to be more like just a leadership podcast. And now it's more of a like professional / leadership / like who are you, what's your life journey. It's a lot more personal. it's not a punk podcast, but we end up having a ton of punks just because of my background. And it's just been fun. It's the hardest thing that I currently do. Like it is the hardest thing in the world, as you know, to do a podcast. Cause like, it's so hard to like get people's interest, but it's been good. It's been fun. I most of the time I enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I think if I listen back to sort of the first episodes I did, they're probably really pretty wonky. But I endured and I got a little bit of traction, and I had cool people say yes and keep saying yes, and giving of their time, which I'm grateful for. And I think like you, I try and have a variety of folks and represent a lot of different kind of stories and journeys, and that's sort of not only one way to find recovery, or maybe there are people like I've had straight edge guests on who are literally the never took a drink kind of straight edge people who just they fell into that for their reasons and locked in young. But I also try and just let the stories unfold, like it's not just about being a dad. It's not just about being sober. It's that broader, like kind of who you are, what do you do? And, I think, I just think the vibe you create is really good. And I think like that interview with Joanna Angel and a lot of people would have taken a different angle on that. And not the angle of, that sex work is real work, but this sort of salacious angle. And you didn't do that. And I thought, it was pretty moving, when she talked about selling her company and this feeling like her fear of being viewed as a sellout. Like it's this, like, what's the worst thing if you're a punk is for someone to say you're a sellout. And I just thought like that was an incredible interview. And like, sort of the humanity of who we all are, no matter our job, and just, we want to be respected.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. That podcast is like that episode. It was super important for me to treat Joanna or anyone that I'd interview from like kind of a, let's say an industry that would be kind of considered like wrong, like socially wrong or whatever it is. Like if I'm going to have someone from an industry on that has kind of been like on the fringe of society, I want to treat them like a business person first. And she's a business person. And I am a firm believer that sex work is work. And when we criminalize and stigmatize people who do sex work, we put them in harm's way, like serious, like harm, like life or death situations. And I think that's just immoral. And I think this is like kind of like the weird idea of like kind of looking down on people who do sex work. It's like, really? So you want to, that's the position you want to take. And by doing that, put those people's lives at risk. Like who's immoral here? And I don't want to be like mean about that and be like kind of pointing fingers who's wrong, but more so it's just like, I want to create a space where anyone could listen to that podcast and just hear a business person talk about their challenges, what they grew, like feeling like worrying about being a sellout on those things. And yeah, Joanna was like cool as hell, like super nice conversation, really fun, like ultra polite, showed up on time, like, which is something that drives me crazy when people show up late and I try not to. Yeah, she killed it. It was great. It was a real fun one. And there's ones that I leave where I don't love as much. And maybe like I felt the person was like bullshitting me, or the person was just giving me platitudes, or the person was like, oh, I don't know. I disagree with that. I've also had some people on from industries or professions that I disagree with. And like, that's something that like, I'm trying to warm into on the podcast, but do it carefully, is like having conversations that push my personal comfort level, but in a way that won't negatively impact the company, because it is a company podcast, right? So it's like there's all sorts of people I'd like to interview and just have like a tough conversation with and like really get into it, but then I have to think, does this serve the company or not? So yeah, it's been fun. Like I've gotten very like so few negative kickbacks on anything, like really like just super minor ones. And then lots of really good feedback. And so I feel like I'm onto something here. It's just taking the time to build it up.
Yeah. And for me, it's that the time thing is such a huge component, but I told myself going in, like, I can only do the best I can do. I've got a family, got a full-time job. I wish I had 8 hours a week to dedicate to it. I don't, so I do my best, but I've gotten, emails, and even at a soccer practice talking to this woman who, I think she sort of Facebook stalked my wife and I a little bit. I think maybe I had a Sober Dad Crew hat on. We couldn't quite figure it out, but she's like, my husband listens to your podcast and it's like really meaningful for him. So I was like,
awesome,
it was like a weird celebrity moment. It's like my one and only ever pseudo celebrity moment on a set of bleachers at a soccer practice. But, enough of that I do feel like, all right, there's a service here.
When you hit me up about being on the podcast, I was instantly interested because it's a different topic than I'm used to being hit about. Like, people either want to talk to me about business stuff or playing in bands. And I've been super grateful to like talk about band stuff, but also it's like, I've talked about it a lot. I'm more interested in talking about business stuff, and business stuff can be like, really like, it depends who you're talking to. It could be like super exciting, or it could be kind of boring, or like, oh. Getting a chance to do something that's like totally outside of one of those two areas is ultra refreshing to me. And I'm not like hesitant to talk about sobriety. And I certainly, like, most of my clients know that I've been sober for a long time, because obviously I don't drink if we go out to dinner or lunch or anything. But I like the idea of just kind of like distinctly talking about, like, having a podcast that talks about being sober, but also that's not the whole focus of it. Because I like your interview style, because we're kind of going all over the place and touching on the things that are important. Because like talking about one thing like exhaustively can just be boring, and that just also means from episode to episode you're just going to kind of regurgitate the same content. So I really like the topic, and that's why I thank you for asking me, and B, I like how you do your interviews. It's been a lot of fun talking to you.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you for your time. Anything you want to end on? Anything we missed that you want to say before we close out?
Yeah, thank you first for having me. I really appreciate it, and I think I'm going to go here. Listen, like I said earlier, like, human beings, we have this immense power. It is crazy how much power we have over the natural world. And just how even our most like minute decisions in a day have immense repercussions, both good and bad, for the world around us. The simplest thing we can do to reduce suffering, the easiest thing we can do, is just be like, you know what? I'm just going to have a salad today, or I'm going to eat differently today. And I'm not asking anyone to like totally turn their life upside down at all. But I don't think there's a person on the planet that's like, yeah, everything's fine. Like, we're in a wild ass situation right now, and I think it's only going to get crazier as the fall comes up with the election. And it's not a commentary on whatever side people fall on. I just feel like there's just so much suffering right now, and most of it feels like we're powerless to do anything, and maybe we are. But what we can have power over is how we treat each other and what we put in our bodies. And I just deeply, deeply encourage people to reduce their meat eating, reduce their consumption, change some of their patterns. If you feel it's in you, go vegetarian. If you feel it's even in you further, go vegan. Do it healthy, read the books, take the path. I think it's the biggest thing that we can do day to day that makes the biggest impact on reducing suffering. And with that, please don't feel I'm lecturing anyone. Live your life the best you can. And if that's not for you, then help reduce suffering in other ways. And I will do my best as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You rock, man. Thank you.
You bet.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts, or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.